Welcome to the Read Down, your weekly progressive political hot take by the Stonewall Democratic Club. I'm Alex Mahajer, and this week we are going to be talking about the fight for getting the most out of President Biden's rescue plan. We're going to be talking about a third vaccination option. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been approved. We're going to talk about this and the ongoing talk of cancel culture on the right, despite the fact that they are literally canceling one of Joe Biden's appointments to the cabinet, his cabinet. We will take time to read the GOP for filth and discuss the latest. This is The Read Down. All right, welcome to The Read Down, everybody. I'm Alex Mahajer, and this week I am so pleased to be joined by my co-hosts, Jonathan Welch. Hey, Jonathan.
Hi, it's so good to be back with you.
It's been a little while since we've all been on the broadcast together at the same time.
I forget what you look like, but now I'm reminded.
Who even are you?
You're a vision in slate and blue and navy.
My color. It's my color. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for being here. And of course, the lovely Ebony Murphy-Root.
Happy Tuesday. Here we are again.
Long Beach. Ooh, ooh.
Yes.
Welcome, Ebony. How's everything going?
It's going. I went back to school in person full time yesterday. Yes.
You're a teacher, and therefore you are eligible to be vaccinated. And I believe you have been, not to air your dirty laundry.
On Saturday night at Cal State LA with some wonderful National Guardsmen. More about that later, but they were terrific.
I'll get that location and address as soon as you are done with this broadcast. And of course, our guest this week, the wonderful Shetarrah Byfield.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you so much for joining us. How's everything going with you?
Everything's going good. We're still in a pandemic, but it looks like we are at the end of the tunnel, so it's exciting.
We're at the beginning of the end of the tunnel. I think
beginning of the end, yes.
Yeah. The end is nigh for COVID life. Shetarrah, what part of the country are you joining us from?
I am in Mar Vista, California.
Come on, Mar Vista. Just a little hop, skip, and a jump away from us in Long Beach. Me and Ebony are in Long Beach.
Shetarrah, where are you from, though?
I'm originally from Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Yes! I'm from Newburyport, Massachusetts.
I knew one of you was going to be
cities. Cut it out.
These toasters are ganging up on me, and I don't like it.
We are, but Shetarrah and I are from sister cities.
Yes.
They look exactly the same.
Shetarrah,
that's
I've
insane.
Been to New Hampshire.
Have you been in Portsmouth?
No.
No.
I don't even remember. I drove through New Hampshire because me and my friend Kat went several years ago to her great grandfather's grave. Like we found the graves of her ancestors, and they were in New Hampshire. And then I went to Brattleboro, Vermont, right next door. It was nice. New Hampshire's pretty.
It's pretty in the spring and in the summer. Mar
Vista, very beautiful as well. So Devin Adante lives in Mar Vista. So hi, Devin, if you're watching. So you guys, thank you all for being here this week. It's been just a crazy week, a lot to cover, and I want to just jump right into it with the weekly read down. This is where we cover all of the hot topics and current events of the week. And first and foremost, the fight for Biden's $1.9 trillion rescue plan rages on while time runs out. So this passed in the House on Friday around midnight our time here on the West Coast. The $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package is now before the Senate. We are hoping that the Senate moves on this week and passes it in time for the March 14th cutoff, which is when the benefits from the previous care package from Congress will expire. So the race is on, and the plan can face a steep hurdle in the Senate with Senators Joe Manchin from West Virginia and Kristen Sinema from Arizona. What do you guys think about the sudden and sort of disappointing backlash or really bite back from these Democratic senators who are really holding us back from progress on everything from the minimum wage increase to passing the Equality Act? Ebony, thoughts on this?
These blue dog Democrats, is that what they're called, are going to be the death of me. Holy moly. I don't understand. Like, I get that they're from purple states, red states, Manchin is kind of his own category, but I don't get it. West Virginia is poor, and those folks need the money. So I don't quite get his angle. And Sinema, maybe someone much smarter can clarify this for me, because whatever her angle is, I get that she's like I get along with both sides of the aisle person. Great, I get that too. But like, what is her angle here? To be able to say, I didn't vote with my party, look at me. These folks are struggling. And I know this because I am struggling. So I hope that our party leadership can really do their thing and bring these folks in line.
Well, and look, and Shetarrah, thoughts on this, because really this bill is a budget reconciliation bill, which means you only need a simple majority in the Senate rather than the 60 supermajority that's usually needed for any other type of legislation to overcome the filibuster. And as we know, the Republicans will filibuster just about everything that the Democrats try to do. But there's exactly 50 Democrats in the Senate, exactly 50 Republicans. Kamala Harris is the tie-breaking vote. So we can't afford to lose even one Democrat. What's the deal with these two senators? And do you see this roadblock as being potentially, holding us back from getting the COVID-19 package?
Yeah, I absolutely do. It's two senators right now that are basically holding up, and like Ebony said, the livelihood of a lot of people. People are struggling right now. And I can't understand why West Virginia, which is one of the poorest states in America, she wouldn't want that to be passed for people. Like I said, we're almost there, a few more months of this, the beginning of the end of the tunnel, but we all need to come together, and people are they're hurting right now. And this is something that could change their lives drastically. I just had a friend who was kicked out of their apartment. I was evicted the other day because they couldn't pay. It was a mere like $200, $300. This money changes people's lives. And I think that it's really, really needed right now. And so for people or for the senators who can't get on that, they need to take a good, deep look and think about their communities.
Yeah, and of course, two Democratic members of Congress in the House voted against the package, but it still passed very narrowly, 219 to 212. Now it's before the Senate. You need all 50 Democratic senators to vote for it for Kamala Harris to come in there and cast a tie-breaking vote. Jonathan, your thoughts on this gridlock, and your thoughts on this gridlock, and more importantly, the $15 minimum wage increase that has basically been killed because you can't do it through budget reconciliation, according to the Senate parliamentarians. So Democrats have sort of back down from that provision. The House included it in the language of their bill that they passed. The $15 minimum wage hike is in the House bill that was passed through the House. The Senate probably not going to pass a minimum wage increase. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first off, I think it's important that we note that the $15 minimum wage increase, the fight for that isn't dead. It's taken out of the reconciliation process. But what's also important to note is that it doesn't have to come, or never came down to Vice President Harris and whether or not she would be able to overrule the parliamentarian. We don't have the votes. We didn't have the votes to raise the minimum wage, unfortunately. We do need to fight for a higher minimum wage. I know that Senator Manchin is open to something like an $11 minimum wage. I don't know about Senator Sinema in this case, but I do think that if we have these holdouts, this is an opportunity for us to take those things aside and figure out a way that we can do this again. We have two opportunities this year to go through the budget reconciliation process, because the gift of Donald Trump and his ineptitude is that they never went through this last year. So we now have the 2020 reconciliation process and the 2021 reconciliation process that can happen in this calendar year. I know that they're talking about the next one going towards infrastructure. That's huge. There are a number of things that we could do. I mean, you could replace the Senate parliamentarian. You could talk to Manchin and Sinema. You could really rally the caucus and figure out just what that number is going to be. But it's at 725. It's been at 725 for well over a decade. And
12 years.
12 years. So in the period of us having a federal minimum wage, the minimum wage has never been as stagnant as it has been at 725. So it needs to change. And I want to make another point. I am not smarter than Ebony. She is smarter than me. But when we're talking about Kyrsten Sinema, because she's asking, like, I don't know what Kyrsten Sinema's deal is. I think, and I don't know what you all think, but I think that she's trying to take the maverick mantle from John McCain. That's from her state. She thinks that, maybe by being a little wild, a little unpredictable, that she's going to win more people over. And I don't necessarily know if that's a good strategy or not, but I think that's kind of where she is. We know that Joe Manchin has never stood in the way of true democratic progress, as much as he makes a big fucking deal out of everything and, makes it seem as though he's going to. He never does. For her, it's a little different. We don't know, but I would put money down on her just trying to solidify her brand, and that's where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jonathan, I did a little math for you guys, and here it is. $15,121.44 is how much somebody makes on a full-time minimum wage job in 1 year in the United States of America. This is crazy that this number has not kept pace with, that was a screenshot of my MacBook calculator, everyone, which literally, if you wanted to buy a MacBook and you were on a minimum wage job, it would cost you a month's pay. A month's pay. And that's before taxes. That's before Uncle Sam has his say. So, it's outrageous that the minimum wage has not gone up in the United States in 12 years. It's outrageous that it's $7 an hour. That is outrageous. It's outrageous that Republicans and Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema are okay with tax breaks for the wealthiest Americans, and corporations pay 0% in taxes, and corporations, the CEOs of these corporations that will struggle too much by putting the burden of increasing the wages of their workers. It's too impossible. They can't handle the burden, but these CEOs are taking record profits during the pandemic. But our Republican senators and Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema think that the minimum wage increase is just too much. It's outrageous and it's infuriating. And I, too, do not know what Kyrsten Sinema's angle is here. She was one of our Blue Wave 2018, people that we got elected, and an ally of the LGBTQ community. Certainly, she's a member. She's a member of our community, and therefore, it's just I'm nonplussed by Sinema particularly. Joe Manchin has been this. We could expect it from him, and it's just unfortunate we couldn't win one more Democratic Senate seat, but here we are. Very frustrating. And I'll note that the Stonewall Democratic Club passed a resolution last month calling for the end of the filibuster. Joe Manchin, Ebony, did you hear this quote? Joe Manchin said, "Jesus Christ, what part of never don't you people understand?" when asked whether he would vote to eliminate the filibuster. Your thoughts on that?
I mean, being a Democrat has to mean something, right? Not just like I'm a less terrible person in a red state. He does this thing where he acts as if, $15 in West Virginia would be a boonda. It would be so much money. It's really not. $15 an hour in any area of this country is really not much. And I don't understand why he's not willing to speak up for the people in his state and give them more of a voice. The filibuster really does give them less of a voice. The filibuster is really meant to give wide swaths of our population less of a voice, because what it does is it elevates the voices of people who live in these states with lots of land and not a lot of people and a lot of, shall we say, our melanin less friends. Okay. And so it's really frustrating because, we're really being led by we really could complain about the tyranny of the minority. And I hope we start using that phrase even more, because that's what the filibuster is.
Yeah. The filibuster is the U.S. Senate, Shetarrah, is a totally anti-democratic institution as it is. I mean, if you think about it, Democrats have 50, Republicans have 50, and yet the Democrats in the Senate represent 40 million more Americans than Republicans do. Is there any way that, and if we are not able to get these kinds of policies passed because of Sinema and Manchin, will Democrats on the whole be punished for this in the next election?
I think they will be punished, you know. It's because the filibuster also needs to be, I think it needs to be canceled. It needs to be abolished. It's not doing any good for any of these policies that have been on the floor forever. It's a waste of time. It doesn't get anything done. And like Ebony said, it's majority of these states that don't have that many people who aren't as affected as these other states that are. And to speak on the minimum wage, I worked as a waitress. I've worked in shops. I've done all this stuff. $15 an hour is not enough to live on. It's not enough to pay rent on. So for that to even be a question as to if that's too much for people, it would be just enough to get them by. And I think also that essential workers, who are the ones who are getting these store clerks and, you know, people who work in restaurants and waitresses and waiters, they're all the ones who are getting paid minimum wage, and they're the ones that we've been relying on during this time. And there's been so much rhetoric around that we need to start, you know, seeing essential workers as essential. Well, then pay them what you owe them. And it shouldn't even be a discussion, because no one can survive on that.
Pay me what you owe me. Sorry, I just had to. So all in all, we're going to see how this pans out. I think that the $1.9 trillion package will pass. I think we are going to need Kamala Harris to break a tie-breaking vote in that, right? I mean, we're going to need Kamala to make it happen.
Yeah,
as how I understand it, and there are some people who are calling for the parliamentarian to be as my co-host. Gosh, what's your name, Jonathan? My co-host Jonathan Welch just said. You know, some people are calling for the parliamentarian to be replaced, that Schumer could possibly replace him. More progressive faction of the Democratic caucus still pushing for the filibuster to end. I'll note the Equality Act, a minimum wage increase. These are now going to be items that are going to be filibustered by Republicans. So they're not going to happen in the Senate unless we eliminate the filibuster. And that's the reality. So moving on to COVID-19 news. After several weeks of declining COVID-19 numbers, infections, and new deaths, we are getting some word now from the CDC director, Rachel Walensky, that we may see a fourth surge because of these variants, that these improvements in the numbers may have stalled and may now get worse. Just in time for this, Johnson & Johnson has announced that their one-shot coronavirus vaccine has been approved by the CDC and the FDA. Emergency authorization was granted over the weekend, and they were beginning shipments of millions of doses of the J&J vaccine out to Americans today. So, you guys, thoughts on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine? And let's start with Jonathan Welch.
Give it to me. I'll take it. It's fine. I'm excited for this because I actually think that this is a vaccine that was tested during all of the variants, like the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines kind of came out before that was happening. So the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we know that its efficacy is like kind of right on in a similar place as the other two, but it's a one-shot vaccine. It doesn't have to, or it can be refrigerated. It doesn't have to be frozen. It's easier to get to communities that are in rural areas. So I think it's fantastic. And I think it's also great when you have something that's one shot so that people can just go get it taken care of. They don't have to return for a second. But also, on top of all of that, we have a manufacturer, Johnson & Johnson, partnering with Merck. And I know I put that in the outline, so you're probably going to talk about it later, Alex, so don't kill me. But the whole great idea is that here we have companies that have come together that are competitors. And it reminds me, I always go back to World War II and think about like how everybody kind of put all of their shit aside. And sorry that my dogs are freaking out in the background, if you guys can hear that. But they put all of that aside so that they can produce this vaccine. Why don't you come back to me, because the dogs are really freaking out and it's causing a problem.
I'm texting with Peter, our stage manager, Peter, and giggling about that, Jonathan. We're like, where's that background noise coming from? And it was you. along. I'm just kidding. So Ebony, thoughts on the J&J vaccine? And you're already vaccinated, so you got the Pfizer. But there's some now talk about like maybe some classism even with the distribution of these vaccines, because J&J apparently less effective than the Pfizer vaccine, though it's on par with the flu shot as being just as effective. So it is an effective vaccine, just not as effective. So is there going to be this? How do we decide who gets one and who gets the other? And is that going to be a new added dimension to this rollout of this vaccine?
I mean, basically, my understanding is that you just get what you get when you showed up. When I showed up at Cal State LA, they just gave me one, and I was happy to receive it. However, I have heard some feedback from folks that it's less effective for folks at certain weights, and so you know that the weight distribution amongst the population can be looked at in terms of ethnicity and who's more likely to be obese and that sort of stuff. But I think that most people feel like the more options, the better. The more supply, the better, and hopefully we can just get it out to a vast amount of the population. I'm also interested in who gets whatever they develop that is only required for one shot, because if you have to drive far away, I think I drove 20 miles. I ended up not getting a shot in Long Beach. I went to Cal State LA, and then Long Beach emailed me that afternoon, but I was able to drive the 20 miles. I have a car. If you don't have to walk, if you have to depend on somebody else for a ride, then that is all about access as well. And so I'd be interested in how our great leaders, our innovative leaders, our innovative progressives plan to address that. Offer people rides. Maybe Uber wants to help, but to be able to get folks to the locations, that will be interesting to see how that is addressed in terms of access and fairness and equity.
Yeah, and the updated numbers on the efficacy of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine: 72% effective at preventing COVID-19 altogether, 86% effective at preventing severe illness and death. So a very effective vaccine. I believe the flu vaccine, the flu shot that we get every year, is only 66% or 70% effective.
Less than that, it's like 40 to 60, somewhere in there.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So, so what this really will do, Shetarrah, is increase the supply. And now President Biden has said that he believes that we can vaccinate all Americans. There's enough supply to vaccinate all Americans by the end of May. This is a lot faster than we originally thought. I mean, we originally thought this was going to take all year, maybe into next year. Do you think that that this Johnson & Johnson vaccine has any challenges with it? And does this, do you foresee any challenges with getting every American vaccinated, or do you think this is too good to be true, or what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I don't know too much about the Johnson & Johnson one. I know that it came out last Friday, and it's a one shot, and you're good, and it's about 75% around there is what I remember. But I am interested to see who gets it, like what population of people get this one, and which ones are getting the 2-shot ones. And also, will be interested to see. For one, give me the shot. I'm ready whenever. I think it's great. More shots, the better. But I am interested to see who will be getting this one and who will be getting the other ones. And then also, I think it is possible to get everyone vaccinated by May, but we also have to take into consideration how people get even to a testing site or a vaccine site at some point, how they sign up online, or maybe they don't have access to the internet to go through the hours and hours it takes to usually get one. So I think I'm hopeful that everyone can get it by May, but I think definitely that community needs to come together and help people figure out, if you have an elderly neighbor or something, how you can get them vaccinated first and help them make a plan. And I've actually set up, I'm going to maybe making a little Facebook group where if you know somebody who needs help, you can set them up in order to help them, give them rides to get vaccinated, help them set up their appointments and all of that stuff. Because I think it's something that's very much lacking, and a lot of people don't even know where to begin to sign up to get the shot.
Yeah, and with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine being, Anthony Fauci, Dr. Fauci says this is not an inferior product. This is a highly effective vaccine. But the perception is that it is not as effective as Pfizer and Moderna. And because of that, there's this appearance of hierarchy that this vaccine is creating. We kind of briefly touched on this earlier, but I want to jump a little deeper into this. Ebony, particularly, I want to get your thoughts on this about, it's easier to get this vaccine out to rural communities because you don't need to store it in sub-zero temperatures, and it's one shot. So it makes more sense to get this out to rural communities and communities that might be more difficult to roll out vaccine, less urban areas. And yet it heightens this perception of there being a tiered system of addressing health in the United States. Does this do anything to continue to create that image?
I mean, this is just America in a nutshell, right? It's the Hunger Games. Like, it's only one shot, but it might be less, it might work less well for you. It might be less effective. These are the decisions that Americans have to make all the time. Take a job that pays less, but you can get home to your kids earlier. It's just sad that we as Americans in this wealthy country with so many resources have to make these kinds of decisions all the time, right? So this vaccine, it doesn't need to be refrigerated at the same temperature, but it perhaps may work less. It just disappoints me that again and again Americans are forced to make these really difficult decisions, are forced to sort of settle for something that is maybe a little bit lesser, but works for them. However, I think expanding access to rural communities is really important, and we have to do that however we can. They're less likely to have cars, less likely to be able to get to a site twice, right? If you're depending on a ride from somebody else, they're like, okay, I'll take you once, maybe taking you again is too much to ask. And so are the decisions that again and again Americans are forced to make, even though we live in this wealthy country with people who have, cars that go up on the side and like 4 houses and whatnot. It is what it is.
Yeah, and this starts to raise the question of the line skipping and kind of takes us back to the square one argument about just the classist element of access to the vaccine. Jonathan, in some states like Texas, people are able to drive out to towns like Corpus Christi, for instance. Rich white folks are able to drive out and get their vaccine, kind of jump the line because they're being less stringent about who's getting the vaccine there, right? And then on the other side of the argument, people say, well, it doesn't really matter because if you got a vaccine, it's contributing to the greater social good, and we got to get everyone vaccinated to just get shots in arms. Do you think that the focus on equity has created a slowdown in the actual rollout of the vaccine? Are we too focused on equity? Are we not focused on equity enough? And with something like a pandemic, what are your thoughts on this?
First of all, I wonder, Ebony, were you talking about a DeLorean when you said cars that go up on the sides?
I was thinking about a Tesla. Am I allowed to use the brand name? But I guess DeLoreans as well. Yeah. I happened to see a Tesla this morning at school in pull-up, so I know that those exist in LA. Those like up on the sides cars.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. I forgot that they had that feature, and I was just thinking about the DeLorean. Anyway, getting back to the topic of equity, I think that we're having this conversation, and it's kind of been foisted on us. I hate to say that by by Twitter, by the media, not to sound like a Republican, but, I do think that we have all of these vaccine candidates, all of these options. When we're talking about, as this comment says from Danny Art, and Pfizer and Moderna's higher efficacies aren't tested against the variants. Like, this is something that's a really good point, where this is just as effective and incredibly effective when it comes to, to keeping people out of the hospital, when it comes to keeping people alive and keeping people from having severe cases that are going to have effects that linger for years to come, possibly for the rest of their lives. People have side effects from COVID, from severe cases of COVID, where they're experiencing COVID-like symptoms for months. And there's been some people who have had it and haven't recovered really for a year. So we're talking about eliminating that from our society, eliminating the possibility of that happening. I think that when we look at something that is a one-shot vaccine that has the same efficacy against more severe cases, that we need to reframe the argument and say that this is a much easier and more accessible vaccine, and that it can go to anyone. And that could come down to high profile people getting their vaccines with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, doing it publicly, going about it and saying, this is just as safe as anything else, and kind of framing the argument that way. But we really have to, I think that we can't give the idea that this is less than that much space, because the reality is that this is a lifesaver, that this is something that when we put that out there for people to get vaccinated, whoever the manufacturer may be, that it's going to be an incredibly effective step towards a better life for everyone. And that's what we need to, I think, really focus on, instead of giving air to this idea that you are less than because you took a vaccine that might be a little bit different from the others.
Yeah, absolutely, Jonathan. I think you're spot on that. My hope is that with this Johnson & Johnson vaccine, we know millions of doses went out this week, that people just get the shots and get the shots in the arms, and let's get people vaccinated. I think at the end of the day, if we get 70% to 80% of Americans vaccinated, we're achieving herd immunity and we're saving lives at the end of the day. So while I understand the focus on equity, and I also understand there needs to be a focus on process to make sure that people are getting it who need it, I also think get the shots in arms. 70%, 75% of the American population.
Yes. And I'm dying to get it, not like of COVID, but I'm dying to because I have underlying conditions. We're here in Los Angeles where the path forward for who gets the vaccine when is a little unclear, and it's a little bit difficult here, and our vaccination rates are lower than other parts of the country. So it's something that I think we can't wait for.
Well, Ebony, I want to ask you about this. I mean, so teachers have begun getting vaccinated in the state of California, which is very important to me because I personally was outraged that the Biden administration, not to criticize our Democratic president, but let me for a second, is pushing to reopen schools without putting a focus on vaccinating teachers. I think that that's absurd. If you want to open schools, vaccinate the teachers. Put them on the priority list and make sure teachers are vaccinated. It's pretty common sense to me. So when we think about this expanding now in California, we're expanding the eligible list. Now we're starting to go down the list. What kind of who do you think is sort of getting shorted in this priority that needs to be made a priority, and how do we resolve those issues?
The great disability rights activist Alice Wong has had a great hashtag called High Risk California. Other people have carried it to high risk MA, high risk Massachusetts. So people with disabilities who may have those pre-existing conditions that really make them feel at risk, particularly vulnerable, are not able to get the vaccine if they are not over 65 or not a teacher. And I know I have some friends who are just really terrified. And so we've got to figure out a way to get disabled people who may be vulnerable for a lot of reasons onto this list. We've got to get the supply up, and we need to get people vaccinated more quickly. People really feel afraid to wait until late April or March. That feels like a really long time from now to ask people to stay in their houses and sort of not mingle in society in this way. And so I'm really hoping that beyond teachers and the elderly and dock workers and people who work in the grocery store, all very important people, because we're all very important people, that we just get the supply up and get people vaccinated as quickly as possible. But really, I'm really sort of fired up by these disability rights activists, because I think using hashtags and social media and getting the word out in other ways about these vulnerable populations that maybe the general population doesn't know about is super important.
And frankly, can I just chime in to say the prison population should be vaccinated. That it is cruel and inhumane to not be vaccinating people who are incarcerated, who are exposed to community spread at a much higher rate. And it's spreading like wildfire in prisons. And so we need to make that a community. Just because they're incarcerated does not mean that we do not have a moral responsibility to saving their lives. They don't get to go to the back of the line because they're incarcerated. So prison populations, I just want to chime in to say that. Very, very important. So, so you guys, FBI Director Christopher Wray appeared before Capitol Hill today to testify for the first time about the January 6th insurrection. And we actually have some video of his testimony. I want to play it and get Shetarrah's feedback about Christopher Wray and his thoughts on white supremacy and how it is now a domestic terror threat in the United States. Here is Christopher Wray.
We all condemn violence by anyone of any political persuasion, but we have to be honest about the significant threats we face, and that's the only way we can work together to take steps to confront them. I think it's critical to that process for us to uncover the real facts of what happened, and given some of the misinformation being spread by some colleagues, I just would appreciate your readdressing a couple of questions. Can you speak with clarity about what we know about the January 6th riot here at the Capitol? You've said there have been, I think, 280 arrests so far. Has there so far been any evidence that the January 6th riot here, the insurrection, was organized by people simply posing as supporters of President Trump's?
We have not seen any evidence of that, certainly at this
Is there any evidence at all that it was organized or planned or carried out by groups like Antifa or Black Lives Matter?
We have not seen any evidence to that effect thus far in the investigation.
And is there any doubt that the people who stormed the Capitol included white supremacists and other far-right extremist organizations?
There's no doubt that it included individuals that we would call militia violent extremists, and then in some instances, individuals that were racially motivated violent extremists who advocate for, the superiority of the white race. But the militia violent extremists is probably at the moment trending the biggest bucket, if you will.
Well,
racially motivated violent extremism, specifically of the sort that advocates for the superiority of the white race, is a persistent, evolving threat. It's the biggest chunk of our racially motivated violent extremism cases for sure, and racially motivated violent extremism is the biggest chunk of our domestic terrorism portfolio, if you will, overall. I will also say that the same group of people we're talking about have been responsible for the most lethal attacks over the last, say, decade. When domestic violent extremists use explosive devices, when they attack government facilities and businesses, when they assault law enforcement officers, when they use violence to interfere with the lawful operation of our government, they should expect the FBI to come knocking on their door, no matter where they try to run.
So, Shetarrah, thoughts on this? I mean, the Republicans today were trying to blame the insurrection on MS-13, on Antifa. Christopher Wray, FBI director, saying unequivocally there were no left-wing agitators here. This was right-wing domestic terrorists. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and the majority of them were white supremacists. This is something that has been the biggest threat to our country forever. And I remember watching it that day and waiting for them to switch it to protesters, to rioters or looters. And it just makes me think back to this summer when I was in those protests for BLM and all this stuff. They wouldn't have even made it to the Capitol's lawn. And it's one of the biggest threats. It's something that has been building up for years and years, and it's always been there. But now Trump gave them the power to use their voices and to spread this hate, and they feel empowered to do so. So I think that's a huge step for him to come out and say that this is one of the biggest threats to our democracy, because it is, and it truly always has been. And any person of color knows that. And knows that what a huge threat that this has always been. So I think it's a great first step that it's finally being acknowledged as one of the biggest threats to our democracy, because it truly is.
Yeah, Jonathan, thoughts? Did you catch this testimony and thoughts on this as we start to unpack the impact that QAnon, for instance, has had on the right, the political right, and the fact that right-wing political violence isn't new. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when a newsroom in Maryland was shot up just a couple of years ago by right-wing extremists I'm old enough to remember Proud Boys Stand Back and Stand By because the Proud Boys were instigating violence at Black Lives Matter protests. I'm actually old enough to remember that during the original George Floyd protests, that right-wing agitators were actually attending BLM protests and instigating violence to make it appear as though it was Antifa. I mean, they're literally accusing the left of doing exactly what their side is guilty of. Your thoughts on this, Jonathan Welch?
Yeah, it's not new, but it's certainly getting worse, right? Like, I think when we see people storm the Capitol, that was definitely a huge moment of concern for myself, for most Americans who care about democracy and who hold that building and what it stands for to esteem. I think that there was a recent poll, and I don't know exactly how the poll was weighted or who exactly was being questioned here, but 17% of the respondents believe in some form of QAnon. So, either pieces or the entire theory altogether. I drive down the 110 to the 101 freeway every morning in Los Angeles, central Los Angeles, and there's a big sign that someone spray painted that said Pedo Joe rapes his grandkids, dogs, and family. And it was just like, this is insane that I'm seeing this in Los Angeles. I know people who have lost people in their lives to QAnon. It has completely taken hold of the Republican Party to the point where the Republican Party doesn't stand for anything that's related to policy anymore. The only thing they care about is getting people angry and, hopped up on this idea, this big lie. I think obviously the big lie of the election, but also the big lie of QAnon. It's incredibly dangerous. It was good to see the FBI director, first of all, answer questions directly, and not dodge them as he is wont to do. But I also think that we have a huge problem ahead of us. This was just kind of skimming the surface. I think Merrick Garland is going to have his work cut out for him, and that's the direction we need to go. Unfortunately, we need to have a very hard law and order approach against these folks.
Amen. And speaking of QAnon and the Republican Party, Ebony, Trump reemerged from disgrace at the CPAC convention over the weekend. We do have a clip of Trump's speech, but I thought more interesting than Trump's speech, because who cares? Okay, we have the video of Trump's speech, but actually Jonathan's facial expression tells me everything I need. You get the gist. He lied about everything.
See that man's face again, it will be too soon. Continue.
Okay, well, he lied about everything. He criticized the Biden administration with a litany of lies. He's teased that he's going to be the 2024 candidate for president in the Republican Party. Important thing to note, Ebony, was the CPAC stage. So here's the CPAC stage. And here is what is known as the Opal Ruin, which is Nazi insignia, and also the most prominent, the logo of the most prominent American Nazi white supremacist group, which is the National Socialist Movement. Prominent. They're well known. And the Southern Poverty Law Center has said they're a top hate group in the United States. Was this a coincidence, Ebony?
I mean, they should be ashamed. Like, I'm almost in tears. When did that become okay? There are no mistakes, okay? Like, when you're looking at planning an event, you look at all the visuals. There are people who do this for a living. Come on, America. Are we okay with this? Holy moly. And, like, Ivanka and Jared, where are you? You know that this is happening. Like, shame. I'm not a big shame, but shame. That is shocking. In 2021, what on earth? There are no mistakes. And then you have these folks marching through CPAC with a golden Trump. I love me a good biblical illusion, right? The golden whatever. I like I said, I'm from Connecticut. I knew liberal Republicans. I know a couple decent Republicans, maybe the last 4 ever. They probably all live in Connecticut. You all need to speak up, right? Like, I know that you want to stay in your party and your fiscal conservatives and whatnot, but like, that's your fiscal conservatism right there. There's your visual. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, in Shetarrah, the Republican Party of Trump has been accused of dog whistling to white nationalists and racists for a long time. I mean, back in during Charlottesville, even during the 2016 campaign, he was dog whistling to white nationalist groups, very fine people on both sides, stand back and stand by. There's a lot of talk about this white nationalist symbol that people secretly do in pictures where they hold up W's with their hands, can look like an okay sign, but it's, white power, I guess. I don't know how to do it because I'm not a white supremacist. But what are your thoughts on seeing that symbolism encompassed by the Republican Party? Has it just been taken over by Trump cultists and white supremacists?
Yeah, so there are no mistakes. There aren't. And if somebody was watching that, if like the W or the white power sign, somebody's going to tell them. Some assistant, some person's going to say, hey, that's that. But then why does it keep popping up? Why, if you know that this is a sign for this, is it there? You're going to tell me that everyone missed that? No. It is dog whistling and it's been happening forever. And it's just to show support still, that I'm still here with you as long as you support me. I can't do it as publicly as I'd want to, but here's this little sign that, I'm still here with you. It's not that hard to just not do racist shit all the time, but it keeps happening because people are empowered to do it by allowing these little things to happen all the time. There's so many groups online and like just even like Twitter, if you go on these threads, there's millions of people who know what these things are and they continue to do it because they know that it hasn't been shut down in the way it's supposed to be. And our Trump didn't ever really do anything about it. And so he is empowering people to continue to do these things. So I don't think that there's no mistakes, and it's disturbing. And there are still some good Republicans out there that stand up and say that we do not stand by this at all. This is not who we are, and make your voices heard. If you don't want to be considered in with the Trumpism and all that, then say something, do something.
Yeah, and Jonathan, to that point, Trump speaking at CPAC, despite being banned from social media because he's such a toxic risk. He's such a risk that he's been banned from almost all social media, and yet CPAC felt it appropriate to give him a platform to propagate more lies, to give a very hungry audience for the big lie. Oksana commented just now about the big lie. There's still a very hungry appetite amongst this base for the big lie that the election was stolen. He has no qualms about continuing to spread it. And yet there was a straw poll that was taken at CPAC that showed that Donald Trump, if it was about the 2024 potential nominees for president. Yeah, this is Oksana. It's Aurelian AF. The big lie justifies the state-sanctioned violence. Absolutely. And here's a straw poll that was taken at CPAC. Thinking ahead, if the 2024 Republican primary for president in your state were held today among the following candidates, for whom would you vote? Now, they made a big deal out of suggesting that 55% of the people at CPAC would support Donald Trump, that the majority of CPAC attendees would support Donald Trump. But Jonathan, that almost seems like a kind of a low number. Like, yeah. CPAC is Trumpist cultists, and like just over half still have an appetite for him. Did you see this poll, and what did you think? Did you think that this has been spun kind of incorrectly?
Yeah, 45% won't. They don't want to support him. That's almost half. And this is fresh out of office, So, I mean, the wound is fresh for these people. Give it a couple of years when, I'm hoping that we get our stuff together on the Democratic side, that we're able to, to give COVID relief, that we're able to help preserve democracy, that we're able to, do some of these things that people can tangibly feel in their lives. And I think that will help independent voters, but also it's going to break down the arguments that the Republicans have against the left. And so I think that it's just going to get tired really quickly. It's good that he's been deplatformed, but if you caught any of the speech, and I did catch some of it, I just really didn't want to hear it again. That's why I made that face, Alex. But I definitely think it was there was no energy behind it. There was no cohesion. And there are some people who are going to eat that right up. But I just think that a lot of people are ready to move on. I don't think they know who they want to move on to next, but it's kind of indicative that Trump isn't necessary. It's not necessarily about him. It's about more the idea that he embodies, which has always been the case. And I think I'm a little bit more concerned about that. Ron DeSantis is number 2. I mean, he's the governor of that state that the convention was held in. So I think that that could have something to do with it, but he's also pretty stupid and pretty Trumpy as a concept. So I think that they're definitely looking at like who can be the next person, because Donald Trump is not the healthiest man and he's in his 70s. So
oof. And it's gotta suck. Gotta suck to be Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, who instigated violence on January 6th and only got 2 and 1% of the vote.
It's gotta suck to be Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz, period. Like,
well, it's gotta suck to be Ted Cruz, period. But that's neither here nor there. We are running out of time, so it is that time of the week. Let's save the last 2 topics that we wanted to talk about for our reads. If you guys don't cover it, I will. But it's that time of the week for the library. It's time to open the library and to read the GOP or anyone we want for filth, or take this chance to get on our soapbox, talk from the heart, speak about something that's on our minds, really anything we want. And everyone gets a chance to just take their moment in the limelight. And I'd like to start this week with Jonathan Welch. Who would you like to read this week?
Sure. You know what? I'll take one of those topics. I'll talk about cancel culture, okay? Because all that Republicans talk about is cancel culture. This was actually the theme of CPAC. If we're going to continue talking about that, it's America Uncanceled, because they have latched onto this idea that all that we want to do on the left is cancel people. No, it's about consequences. If you do something that's so egregiously un-American, if you say things over and over and over again that go against the liberties of free people in this country, that go against preserving our rights, that go against building a more perfect union, then you absolutely deserve to face consequences for those things that you think and you believe. If you, Josh Hawley, you, Ted Cruz, are the people who are out there instigating violence, we all saw Josh Hawley with his fist up in the air, pointed right at all of these people who are just about to storm the Capitol and come out for blood, and now he's playing innocent and saying that he's been canceled. Well, that is exactly what you face, these consequences, and you are supposed to be of... I'm so sorry, am I getting muted and unmuted?
No, I hear you.
Okay, great. I'm getting notifications that say I'm being muted and then unmuted, like over and over. Anyway, technology and dogs are not on my side tonight, but this is all to say that, that if you are someone who has instigated this behavior, if you have made it so that your entire existence is something that just goes against the ethos of being a good American, and that we should strive for, taking care of each other, then you absolutely deserve to face the consequences. Nobody owes you a damn thing. We don't owe you a book deal. We don't owe you the title of senator. We don't owe you a $174,000 salary. We might owe you a mariachi band playing in front of your house, but that's about it. But even then, like, you don't deserve that. These are people who absolutely do not have, should not have a place in American government. They should not have a voice to influence culture and politics, and that is what we need to fight against.
Welch, thank you for your read this week. Ebony Murphy-Root, who would you like to read this week?
Gosh, I have so much, but I'm gonna just try to thread the needle. Okay, so here goes. So the three of us, me, John, and Alex, we were texting a little bit about the fact that we're all news junkies, right? And it's not the best thing, but if you follow the news a lot, you know that instead of focusing on the rescue plan this week, the Republicans were talking about Mr. Potato Head, the new genderless potato head that you can make its own gender, not non-gendered. You just make it its own gender. So that's what they were talking about, instead of the fact that Americans are going hungry and have no money, et cetera, et cetera. So pay attention to that, okay? The other thing that I want us to pay attention to is Tish James, who I think very soon, maybe sometime in 2021, might be the governor of New York. So just pay attention, follow the news, and follow that story. I'm a big fan of Tish James. Maybe you are. Now's the time to support her. Okay, so we're all paying attention to CPAC. The other thing that was happening this weekend, in addition to CPAC, was this thing called AFPAC. And I know this because I am a weirdo news junkie. So this was the more hateful, more racist CPAC, that America First conference by that Nick Fuentes kid who was the Latino white guy from BU who was extra racist. So he had that Dr. Paul Gosar, and pay attention to what was going on at AFPAC. That was the CPAC stuff they couldn't pay attention. They couldn't put on TV. Okay. And then locally, all right, we've got SD30 today. So we know that Holly Mitchell has gone to the Board of Supervisors, and we've got a special election today. Most people have already voted. We know the Stonewall endorsed candidate is Assembly Member Sidney Kamlager. There are a lot of other people in the race too. So pay attention, because we know all politics is local. And I am just gonna, be in my school marm voice and say that, Americans, racial capitalism is not gonna save you. Whiteness is not going to save you. Ask all the brown people with all our many degrees. Ask all these white folks from West Virginia, Joe Manchin's constituents. Ask Ron DeSantis's, poor Florida constituents. What's going to save us is coming together and solidarity. So I hope that we as Americans can really come together and fight for what we really need, which is good wages, access to healthcare, and good schooling for everybody, not just the people who can write the checks.
I was snapping in a Z, I guess. Amen, Ebony. Thank you for that. Read this week. Shetarrah, Byfield, our guest. Who would you like to read this week?
I would like to do a little bit on cancel culture as well. It's something that a lot of my peers have been discussing. I think that there's a huge difference between being canceled for something you did back in college or back in middle school or high school. But there's a difference if you're actually meaning to make amends because you want to make amends and change, or there's a difference because you were caught. And in the case that you were caught, you're only apologizing now or trying to cancel culture because you were caught. And I think that, like Jonathan said, these are the people that we put into office to represent us. They are the ones who are representing us and making and changing our lives every day. And so I believe that they should be held accountable for what they do. And that shouldn't be something that is a crazy thing. And I believe in cancel culture because I believe that it gives people the right to, disagree, or you come out and say, I don't like this person because of this, that, or the other, and that they're racist or they said something. I think people should be held accountable. And if more people were held accountable for their actions, we'd be living in a different world. And then also, who else do I want to talk about? Sidney Kamlager. Tonight is a big night. I am hoping and praying, and I'm thinking that she will be elected to the U.S. Senate, and she will be the first or the only Black woman, if elected, in the U.S. Senate today, or when she's elected, which is so important. And there should be so many more. So I'm really, really excited for that and to see what's to come with that here in the local area of the 54th district, which I am also in, Mara Vista. So I'm very excited for that. And that's about it. So I have.
Thank you so much, Shetarrah Byfield, our very special guest this week. This week, I'd like to just chime in to this conversation and say, Andrew Cuomo, two things really. Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, we had Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo, third sexual assault allegation or sexual misconduct allegation against him by former aide or staffer. Andrew Cuomo, it's time to go. It's time to go. After one, it's like, let's hear what you got to say. After two, it's like your apology better be very sincere, and you got to be making amends here. Number three, it's like you got to resign. You probably should have resigned after number one, to be honest with you. But we can't have any moral clarity in our party if we don't lead by example. And Andrew Cuomo having this third allegation come up, a very credible allegation of him using his power in a way that's sort of that's inappropriate. And it's not just the sexual misconduct allegations. He's apparently a huge bully, and these stories are now starting to roll in. A bully, abusive to his staff, and it's time to go. And we need the Democratic Party to lead with moral clarity. That's why AOC is so effective, because she leads with moral clarity, because she talks the talk and walks the walk. I love her, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum. The other thing with this cancel culture is cancel culture, holding people accountable, is the way that we as a society are able to grow and become the vision of a society that we wish to be. Court decisions have this in their holdings going back hundreds of years about walking with your feet. If you don't like it, the law might not be able to address it, but you can as a person. You don't have to watch it. You don't have to like it. You can walk with your feet. You can demand that this person no longer represent you. You can demand this show not have those advertisers, because that is what we wish to see as a society. Cancel culture being used as a weapon by the right is hilarious, especially since we just had Neera Tanden, who is Joe Biden's nominee for budget director. The White House just moments ago withdrew her nomination because Republicans and Joe Manchin didn't like some of the mean things that she said. They canceled Neera Tanden because she criticized them. That is not what cancel culture is about. That is not the appropriate usage of cancel culture. She criticized you and you didn't like it, and it sets an awful precedent. The right, the Republican Party, screaming about cancel culture and then literally failing to confirm a nominee for Joe Biden's cabinet because she criticized them on social media. What a bunch of snowflakes. You gotta be kidding me with this. Regardless of what you feel about Neera Tanden or how much she might have hurt your feelings on social media, she's abundantly qualified for the job. I've met her. I've interviewed her for a different podcast. She's abundantly qualified, and it's a shame and sets a terrible precedent. Andrew Cuomo, however, that's the kind of thing where we need some moral clarity, where we need you to resign. We need you to step down so that our leaders can lead with moral clarity. It's two different things. So that's my read for the week. This has been the Read Down, weekly progressive political hot take by the Stonewall Democratic Club. I'm Alex Mahajer. This week I've been joined by my lovely co-hosts, Jonathan Welch.
Bye.
And Ebony Murphy-Root. Bye. And our very special guest this week has been Shetarrah Byfield. Thank you, Shetarrah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our stage manager is Peter Denz. Thank you, Peter, for all that you do. We are live every Tuesday night, 6 p.m. Pacific time. And if you are interested in joining the Stonewall Democratic Club, consider becoming a member. You can do it at stonewalldems.org/join. Today, there is a low-income membership, too. If you don't have lots of funds, you can do a $10 membership. It's good for a year. So visit us, stonewalldems.org/join. And Sydney Kamlager is, I think, as one of our commenters said, that election is today. So good luck, Sydney. You're our Stonewall endorsed candidate. We're rooting for you. And we will be back next week. Thank you all for joining the Read Down, and we'll see you all later. Bye-bye.